afternoon all. This is Mrs. Neetu Shrivas, working as an assistant professor in Department of Humanities, IPS Academy, IES, Indore. Today I have been going to talk on barriers to communication. One of the most important part of communication skills for professionals. We all learn languages in our school and academics. We all learn different languages, Hindi, English, mother tongue, all that. But what is there, a point has come to introduce communication skills in the professional courses like engineering, management. Nowadays even we have introduced communication skills in medical science also. Because we all know the language, but proper communication skills actually needed for the professional is a different thing. We must know the terminologies and particular the barriers we face in communication skills to be effective in communication skills. So let's just start with the definition of barriers. What is barriers to communication? According to businessdictionary.com, barriers to communication are defined as aspects of or conditions that interfere with the effective exchange of ideas or thoughts. Barriers to communication can be anything that can distort or prevents the free flow of communication. It is just not the language. It is just not the bad language or this thing, but anything which is distorting. It can be from the noises coming out, the bad communication, the bad noise coming out of somebody's mouth, and many things like if somebody is not well, if there is background is not well, if somebody is not feeling happy with the person, and all such distortions that is coming in the free flow of communication is the barrier. Let's see what are the types. First is physiological barriers, second is gender barriers, physical barriers, semantic barriers, psychological barriers, and cultural barriers. All the first three barriers, that is physical barrier, it includes the physiological barriers includes sensory dysfunction and other physical dysfunctions. Example, requires functioning of the senses in both the sender and the receiver. Limitation of human body and mind adds up to the physiological barrier causing interruption in. For example, let's say somebody is having a high fever and has to conduct the meeting. Then the communication, whatever communication is having, whether he is using a language, better language, good language, whatever he is doing it, he will put lots of effort to communicate the message in the meeting or whatever the things has to be discussed in the meeting. But if he is not physically well, he is having a high fever, then it becomes very difficult for a person to communicate effectively. Because the communication results, the communication is called successful only when the results has been seen. In that case, the communication will not be good enough. It is not called effective enough. So physiological things are like, one example I have given it, let's see some other examples. If there are two people along the communication, the traits that distinguish them as individuals can be the root cause of communication barriers. Example, for example, a person with short-term memory loss is unable to convey the message after a while as she forgets the message, and hence the communication fails. So this is such type of person's inability to communicate properly is called the barriers. Causes, just let's go some of the causes. Let's see. Deafness and hearing impairment, blindness and vision impairment, speech disorders. Some people say is very fast, such type of speech disorders. Some have a problem of saying it very slow. Some people take very long pauses to communicate. Memory is also one of the example of physiological barrier. If you don't understand, if you don't memorize things, if you don't know what you had to say at a particular time, that can also call barriers. That can also create barriers. Now, some type of selective perception, filtering and alertness, if you're not attentive enough while communicating, that can also become a barrier. That can also affect the effectiveness of the communication. Physical condition. For example, physical conditions are like the most common reason for interpersonal barriers are as follows: limited vocabulary, emotional outburst, communication selectivity, poor listening skills, noise in the channel, cultural variations. All these can cause different types of barriers in the effective communication. For example, let's talk about the gender barriers. Now, gender barriers have become less of an issue in recent years, but still there is a big difference between the two genders existing in the world. Like if what a man to man communicate cannot be done in the men to women communication, or vice versa. So such a types of communication distortions happening because of the gender issues, that can be a barrier. So while communicating, one must neutralize the words they are using. That is how you can overcome the gender barriers. Now let's discuss about the physical barriers. Physical barriers are three types: noise, time and distance. So noise is, in a technical parlance, noise is like anything which disturbs the communication. For example, actually the noise coming in the background. For example, if some construction work is going on in nearby when you are communicating, drilling and all such things disturbs the communication flow. Such type is also called noise. And noise is like if somebody is talking and has very slow noise, or the volume of the person is still very slow, that can be a noise. If somebody is giving a notes or something in writing, so the bad handwriting or a bad photocopy which is ununderstandable, that can also be called noise. Then how a time can be a barrier? Time in case of when the message has to be delivered on a particular time and you get late in delivering the message, then a time can be a barrier. Or you have conveyed the message before time, that can also be a barrier. So time in such sense can be a barrier in free flow of communication. Now distance, as you see, you know that the classes have a particular a particular length and breadth of a class is there. Beyond that length, beyond that bigger room cannot be a good communicator, cannot be accommodate good communication, because distance becomes a barrier. Nowadays, even in the world of internet we are living, we can communicate a person in just a fraction of seconds across the globe. Even then, the distance can be a barrier. The way you communicate with the person face to face, that cannot be happened across the globes. In that way, distance can be a barrier. Even if you are talking on this thing in a bigger room, it is difficult to communicate. In a smaller room, it is easier to communicate. In that way, distance can be a barrier. So you can neutralize all these things. Noise can be neutralized. Nowadays, if you see corporate world, in a corporate world, they have noise-proof rooms certain times, meeting rooms at least. They have that so that there will be no disturbances. Time we can neutralize, time you can overcome such type of barriers. You know the importance of the message. If it has to be delivered on time, you will be delivering it. See, physical barriers or physiological barriers, all these barriers are easier to remove, students. Very easier. Only the difficult thing people face in the world today. In fact, we, in a personal life also, we have a psychological barriers more than all these physical and physiological barriers. We don't pay attention to such psychological barriers. We even don't know about it. The awareness is very less in the common people that we do face psychological barriers. For example, you must all have listened to the terms like, phrases like your friends or colleagues or your workplace people or your boss must be saying, your parents must be saying to you that, I didn't mean it. That particular phrase says that I didn't mean it. Then what do you mean by then? What was your intention about it? If it doesn't mean that, there was a psychological barrier. You haven't communicated it properly, or you have not interpreted it properly. If you have certain confusion, if you see the person is psychological or culturally different from you, or he has a different background, he has a different educational background, please learn that first and then communicate with the person. Psychological barriers are the most difficult barriers to remove from the communication. Let's talk about semantic barrier first. Language related barrier. For example, somebody is pronouncing the words wrong. If there is a different languages, the people, if you don't know the language, all these such type of barriers are called semantic barrier. Again, it is easy to remove such type of barriers because learning language is not a difficult thing. Learning communication correct is a difficult. So learn the language properly, use the common words with the people. In this way, you can overcome a semantic barrier easily. Let's now talk about the most important barriers, that is socio-psychological barriers. The very first socio-psychological barrier is attitudes and opinions. People having different opinions will not listen to you if they have a different opinion, different views on some particular topic. They will be listening to you physically, but they will not understand a word what you are saying. Same in case of emotions. The second point, emotions, if in an emotional stage, if you are very happy, if you are very sad, please don't communicate professionally in professional setups, because in such cases you may be communicating wrong because you are emotional at that particular time. That is why if you see the professionals seems to be, though they are not, but they seems to be not very emotional and practical enough. They try to hide their emotions when they are communicating with the world or in an official setup. They don't show their emotions at all. They're very professional. They seems to be very professional. Though there is no a human being in the world with zero emotions. Nobody. People have the emotions, but yes, of course, particularly at the time of professional setup, professional communication, we had to hide those emotions. We had to control those emotions so that there will be no barrier created in the communication. Then comes close-mindedness. Now, what is close-mindedness is? Close-mindedness that you are not ready to learn. Particularly this type of barrier happens with the people who are not very educated. I am sorry to say this, but yes, of course, people, those who are educated enough, they are ready to learn new things. And that is the overcoming the close-mindedness barrier. If you are close-minded, you are not ready to learn the things, you are not ready to understand the new things, then a barrier happens. For example, let's say you are explaining a new concept or a term or a technology to your boss, and he thinks or she thinks that I know everything, I am the boss. Then the barriers arises. He will not listen to you at all, and the things will stop there only. The communication will not be done effective enough. So that is how the close-mindedness plays a role in a barrier. Next is status consciousness. Now, status consciousness is from the year-long phenomena, students. Let's say everybody in their own sense have a consciousness for the status, whatever position they are having. A country like India, we have a status consciousness about the religion, about the caste we are belonging to. We are of higher caste. People think that we are on the very high caste people. We are of this religion or this thing or that thing. So, or in the professional setup, the status of the person they're working on, the position they are working on. Again, the same example will be applied on this also. The boss not listen to the subordinate not listening to the boss, as they say that bosses always say such type of things. So such type of consciousness, the mindful consciousness of such things always will create a barrier. Then comes the source of communication, the source of information. Who is giving the information? Of course, the student will listen to the faculties because they think that the source is correct. They will never cross-check the faculty saying right or wrong. But if somebody who's of low status or of somebody who's not like faculty or something, they will not listen to such type of person. They will think, then the barriers arises because they will think that the person is not right person to give this information or who is not right person to deliver a lecture. If a student is delivering a lecture, so nobody will listen to him. The student will not pay attention, and that is how the barrier will arise. Then comes inattentiveness. Inattentiveness again is a very long phenomena, olden phenomena. And nowadays, because of the mobile and screen time increases of the people, inattentiveness is the major problem of communication nowadays. Two people sitting in a restaurant even, in such informal thing also, they don't pay attention to each other. They come and spend money to such a high restaurant and spending so much of money, but they're not listening to each other at this particular time, and they are more concentrated on their mobiles. So this is how the inattentiveness creates a barrier. If you're not attentive enough to what person is saying, then of course the barrier will arise. This has to be removed by anyhow. If first thing, when you're communicating with the person, have eye contact and talk to the person, listen to the person properly, and then think about it and then answer. This is how you can overcome this type of barrier called inattentiveness. And then comes the faulty transmission. For example, you have transmitted a message or you emailed somebody and email has not reached on time, or you typed something on the social media or on WhatsApp, and without completing the message has been sent. Such type of transmissions can also create barriers to communication. Some more socio-psychological barrier: poor retention. In the last lecture, what you have learned, that is not, if you have not revised it, then it becomes, you will not retain whatever you said. If inattentiveness is there, you will not retain what you have learned, right? And that is how the barriers will arise. If somebody asks you what you have learned it, or if teacher asks you, ask me the questions, you cannot answer it. You cannot have doubts also, even because you didn't retain anything, you were not attentive enough. Then comes unsolicited communication. If you are not ready to listen, if you are not actually prepared for the communication, then also the communication barriers arises, because you had to be prepared enough, you had to be open enough to have a communication. Otherwise there will be a problem. If you are not ready, nobody can make you sit. It's not like a vessel to be filled by the water. Communication is like, you had to be open up, you had to be attentive enough, you had to have an interest in the communication. Otherwise there will be a barrier. If you're not interested, nobody can, even in the best communicator, even the best teacher cannot make you understand what it has to be said. So these were the psychological barriers. Kindly pay more attention to the psychological barriers to be removed. These has to be read properly, understood properly before communicating, and then you should go for the communication. And that is how you can make it very effective enough. Now see, causes of cultural barriers. There is in India, like the country like India, we have different cultures in the country also, in the same country. I always tell my students that this India as a country is an example of the world when it comes to cultural settings, cultural barriers, or any type of culture studies. If you're doing it, it is one of the model. At every 10 kilometers the dialects changes. There are many languages, so many cultures, the food, different colors, the dressing, everything changes with the distance. So this is an example, this is a model of the cultural difference in the world. So how culture can be a barrier? See, two people belonging to different culture, directly coming on the ethnocentrism. Everybody thinks that their culture, their religion, their caste, we are best. Now, ethnocentrism means measuring or judging one's own culture against another culture. Everybody thinks that. Everybody thinks that we are the best. Our culture is the best. And that makes barrier certain times, because people are from different cultures. Nobody is same in the world. No one country in the world has the same religion or a culture they follows. Every country, every state in the world has a different cultures to be followed. So we had to, respect the other cultures, other languages, other people also, to communicate at least properly. Otherwise, if you have back of the mind, आप ये सोचते हो कि this particular religion or these people are not good people enough, so it will always be a barrier. You cannot talk to them properly. You will not listen to them properly, at least. So, in a way, language, we have a different languages. Language can always be a barrier. If somebody is talking even Hindi in a different tone, in a different dialect, then also you cannot understand properly. Signs and symbols, for example, can be a barrier. Everybody doesn't know all the signs and symbols of different parts of the world. Stereotypes and prejudice, again, It's sort of ethnocentrism only, that we are prejudiced to see that this particular culture or this particular caste or this particular people belonging to this place are not good, or this type of prejudices we are having back of the mind. Then the communication barriers arises. We cannot talk to the person effectively enough. Then becomes the behavior and beliefs. The way you behave with the people, by the status of their by their monetary aspect, you looking at the person, the way he is carrying himself, accordingly you behave with the people, in India at least. So with that actually the barriers arises. Then comes the religion. We have talked about it, that different if you belong to a different religion, people don't respect other religion. If they are not respecting other people's religion, the communication barriers also arises in that case. So that's all from my side. Thank you all.